Through those conversations, I really got clearer about my business strategy. I've launched 3 weeks ago now. I've got 11 people at this point.
Meet Brad Eather, host of the Selling is Creative podcast. We talked about what started at podcast conversations, turned into a successful product launch in the most crowded B2B niche you can think of.
So I'm selling essentially a LinkedIn course, which is a very busy place. I've got a digital communications background, and a lot of the advice that I saw online, I thought was rubbish.
He also broke down his process to distribute his podcast several times a week on LinkedIn without an editor.
I will organize and record 3 podcasts in the space of a week, then edit them over the next 3 months.
He also explained how he makes his podcast stand out in the B2B sales niche.
We're going to get pretty bored talking about sales all the time.
And so much more. So without further ado, here's my conversation with Brad Eather. You started your podcast, Selling is Creative, in October 2024. Today you're 13 episodes in and you've seen some return on investment quite fast. But before we dive into that, let's talk about why you did start the podcast in the first place. Was there a particular moment or a challenge that pushed you to do it?
Yeah, so I'm selling essentially a LinkedIn course, which is a very busy place. The reason I decided to do that is because I've got a digital communications background, and a lot of the advice that I saw online, I thought was rubbish. That didn't mean, or doesn't mean, that I'm not competing with those people. So there was a couple of reasons behind the podcast. One was to elevate myself with respectable people, to give myself some credibility. The other one is that I've got quite a creative background, and I think that if you want to take the leap and go online, you need to apply some creativity. And one of the challenges that I was coming up against was that people in sales roles didn't see themselves as creatives. So part of the reason behind the podcast and naming it Selling's Creative is almost polar opposite of one another. And the whole idea is to challenge the idea of what it means to be creative. And at the end of every episode, I ask the question, what's your definition of creativity? And the answers are overwhelming that creativity isn't artistry. Being creative just means taking yourself out of a particular set of beliefs and trying something new. I suppose that's what you could synthesize what I've learnt from asking that question to so many people down. Yeah.
Yeah. And so so you mentioned sales. And I'm curious to know, because I've listened to some of your episodes, and obviously you talk about communication, you talk about sales, but I've also noticed that you talk about AI, workplace, happiness. And so I'm curious to know, when we have your ideal profile in mind, which means the sales team, and when I see the topics, how does it align with your podcast audience, and how do you choose the guest for your podcast?
Well, my ICP or ideal client would be someone in a position of leadership, sales leadership, or a small business owner, maybe a marketing leader. But the idea of it is that we're going to get pretty bored talking about sales all the time on a podcast. It's really niche. So what are the things that are affecting people right now? What are the challenges? How do we broaden our thinking to open ourselves up to new and creative ways of operating our businesses, leadership, and different ways to approach leadership, and selling, new approaches to selling. So they're the quite simply the topics that I'm interested in exploring. And so that's what I try to do with the podcast. Make a resource that's valuable for not only me, but for the people listening that are in those leadership positions, so that they can just have a platform to change their thinking in one way or another around a certain challenge, whether that be AI, whether that be Gen Z coming into the workplace, whether that be new ways of problem solving. They're the kind of topics that I explore, because I think that they're the kind of things that are of value to people in those leadership positions or business ownership positions. In terms of how I get people on the podcast, I network. And it's probably one of the great things about having the podcast is that it opens you up to more new and interesting people. I have had people approach me to be on the podcast, but so far I've been quite selective about who has an interesting take. And that's kind of my selection criteria. Who has something valuable to bring to the podcast as an overall conversation that has a different perspective, a different way of doing things. And they've sort of just come up naturally through going to networking events in person, through networking on LinkedIn, through referrals, like quite a few people have come to me via referrals, or someone's just said, "Hey, I saw that episode that you did. You should have a chat with this person." And it's all happened quite organically. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really nice when we get some referrals from others, because we can trust the people who bring other people who suggest, yeah, I think you should talk to this person. So something that I've noticed, and it's really appreciated. So I'm glad that you mentioned that. You mentioned earlier about your LinkedIn course. Is it your recent rebranded service, Tomorrow Communication, or is it something else?
Yes. So the business is called Tomorrow Communications. The online sales course is called Digital Sales Mastery, but I do many other things under that. So I hold workshops for businesses, and I hold full-on strategy sessions where we map out the communication strategy moving forward for the year, aligning sales and marketing. But it all sits underneath the Tomorrow umbrella. And then the digital sales mastery course is something that you could go onto my website and purchase now if you wanted to.
Yeah, nice. I will put the link in the show notes. But just to dive a bit into that, so I would suppose it's for sales teams, as you mentioned, or people with a higher role in sales. What kind of problem do they need to solve, and how do you help them?
The challenges are different depending on where I meet someone. So there could be one of the challenges that I solve for on the high level from a business perspective is, how do I actually start changing my business habits, I suppose, to shift from a traditional sales approaches, whether that's calling, into more of a content-based online ecosystem. So taking the business from like just a static website into a content ecosystem. But I do that using their existing resources. So without necessarily employing a marketing team, how do we use those existing resources, whether that's a salesperson or the founder, and develop those in a timely but very sort of regimented way, to the point that, I would say 18 months down the track, we've really got all the processes in place to jump to the next stage, which would maybe be hiring a marketing person. From a sales perspective, the Digital Sales Mastery course is all about understanding online influence, human motivations in a digital context, understanding how to make content that's memorable. So rather than an approach where you have to make content, you got to post X amount of times a week, how can I be intentional with the content that I'm creating, with the resources that I have, so that I can make it work for me, not me working for the content. So taking into consideration all the different things that a salesperson would have to do during the day, and putting it into a context where they can understand, okay, now is a moment where I can make a piece of content within my existing skill set and contribute to that communications channel. So that's kind of the problem that I'm overcoming with a lot of salespeople. Where do I start? Like, I know I need to do something. What's the most effective way to do it? And that answer, for many people that are working within an organization, has to be up to them, and they need. So what I do is provide them the tools and understanding to get a really nice overview of where their particular set of circumstances live, so that then they can make an informed decision about how they want to approach social media. Yeah.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, as I said, I went on the website and I've noticed that 2 of these testimonials are for people who came on the podcast. We had a conversation a few weeks back, and you mentioned to me that you started the podcast, but actually you started working on your offer around episode 6, I believe. And from there, things went pretty fast for you. So what happened there? Real quick, Brad and I are about to talk about how you went from having podcast conversation to build this LinkedIn course and get some clients. And I know that some of you are not seeing any return on investment for your podcast, and I want to help. So I started doing free audits. The plan is simple. We get on the call for about 20 minutes so I can learn about your podcast, your business, what you tried that didn't work. And about a week later, I send you my personal notes and your personalized action plan so you can set up your podcasting lead gen system in 4 weeks. So again, it's totally free. You get your action plan. I get the insights. I think it's a win-win situation. If you're interested, the link is in the show notes. And now let's go back to my conversation with Brad.
I mean, if we're going to talk about the business journey as a whole, I knew I had something to offer, but naturally, I think a lot of business, or a lot of, don't like calling myself an entrepreneur, but let's call myself an entrepreneur. I had an itch that I needed to scratch, but trying to figure out how to do that is one thing. Like having the vision's one thing, actually knowing how to do it's something else. So for the first 9 months of business, I would say that I was in a state of figuring it out. And that's about the time that I started the podcast. And the podcast, as I mentioned, was the reason behind it was to elevate myself within certain industries and with certain people. And, well, I mean, another thing that it probably gave me is accountability to continually show up and continually do those kind of things. It was actually through those conversations and through conversations that happened outside of the podcast and talking with people about similar things that they'd done that I really got clearer about my business strategy. And once I got that, I just went straight into execution. And that's when things started to go the other way for me. So during that process, I started working on a large scale project, and I essentially built the digital sales course alongside. So I was developing that resource for that project, which then I've now turned into a product, alongside this essentially what is now an 18-month project, that it will end up being an 18-month project. And then once I'd built that, there was a lot of networking that I was doing behind the scenes to get myself to a point where I had the right people ready to endorse me. And when I say endorse me, I asked them for help and asked them for their honest opinions. I've brought them in and essentially given them early access to my course because I know that their opinion matters to people. That's the long and short of it. And so there's still quite a few testimonials that are going to come through in the next few weeks, but they are my network that I've chosen to represent me and give me access because I know that they have a trusted opinion. And then on the flip side, I've had paying customers come through the program as well. Keeping in mind that I've launched this, might have been 3 weeks ago now. So I've got 11 people through the course at this point, and they're at various stages of completing a 4-hour course. Yeah.
Awesome.
That's kind of where it's at. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
I'm looking forward to seeing how it goes. But yeah, it seems like a great start from what I'm hearing.
I couldn't be happier.
Awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. The feedback so far has been absolutely amazing. So that's what I'd try to say. Like, The quality of the product is, at the end of the day, what is going to drive business, not all the other stuff.
Yeah, totally makes sense. Okay, so going back to the podcast, because you mentioned accountability, and I can tell that the podcast, you need a lot. I mean, you need to be really focused and keep going with the podcast. And LinkedIn is the platform where I'm the most active. Obviously, I release the podcast on audio platforms and YouTube, but LinkedIn is where I actually post content, DM people, create my network. And I see you distributing your podcast several times a week on the platform. With Growth Strategy have the biggest impact so far on your podcast, for your podcast?
To be honest with you, to be completely honest with you, I've never really been that interested in growing the podcast or trying to have that as a goal. It's not my goal. My goal is to grow the business. And so in terms of that, how I view LinkedIn and the content that the podcast allows me to do is as little conversations, as moments that maybe someone sees in the feed, but if I think that something's relevant to someone that I've had a conversation with in the past, having that clip to send them keeps the conversation going. And it might be a simple thank you, or it might be like, oh, wow, like and then we keep talking about something. And they're the hidden relationships behind all of this that ultimately are going to drive my business. So in terms of growing the podcast, it's kind of happening organically, but I sort of see podcast growth as something out of my control, and I will just rather focus on the things that I can control, which are making sure that the right people see the things that I think that they should see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Earlier you mentioned that people come to you to ask you if they can come on the podcast. They come through your the networking that you do, or because they saw some of these clips. Do you know?
Most of them, most of the people that approach me to be on the podcast are people that I've never spoken to before, and they pop out of I don't know where they come from, but they come into the DMs and ask me to be on the podcast. Usually if I've got a relationship with someone, they will know if no one's asked, but if someone did want to be on the podcast and they had something interesting to say and I had a relationship with them, then it would make sense to have them on the podcast if I thought that it was something worth talking about. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
A lot of people, the people that have asked, they've almost been the whole LinkedIn connect and pitch kind of people.
Yeah, I see.
Hmm.
I'm curious about your workflow, because as I mentioned, you publish, you distribute on LinkedIn several times a week. I'm curious to know your workflow, the tools that you use, and how do you work from recording to distributing on LinkedIn? What's your workflow?
So I have a bit of a creative process. I have a list of people that, first off, I have a list. I have a list of people that I want to talk to. I have a list of topics I want to talk about. And for example, I wanted to talk about Gen Z in the workplace. And it just so happens that at a networking event, I found that person. And so it was an instant, like, you have this to offer. Like, I've been looking for this. So they came on the podcast. But it starts with a list. The list gets you organized. From there, I've never had anybody say no either. That's another thing to point out. From there, I invite them to be part of the podcast, depending on how clear I am about what I want to talk to them about, or depending on different situations, I'll invite them to have a chat, and maybe we workshop the podcast, or I get to know them a little bit better. They get to know me. From there, I schedule it, we do the podcast, and then we get into the editing. And I generally work in batches and about 3 months ahead of time. So I will organize and record 3 podcasts in the space of a week, and then I will edit them over the next 3 months, essentially, so that I've got plenty of time. And in terms of technology, I use Riverside, and that's kind of it. Yeah, that's the only tech stack that I have for my podcast. I edit it. I was editing it in a different program, but it's much easier to just edit it in Riverside now that they've got a lot better. I generally use Riverside's like editing, like it'll go find some clips, or now you can even just type in like what conversation, and it'll make a clip, and I will go in and edit those so that just to tighten it up a little bit. But that's kind of the whole process. I don't do much beyond that. I suppose planning the podcast, different to your podcast, I write an intro for my guests. I introduce why we're talking about them. I frame it into a sales lens so that there's sort of a through line. And then I write the first question. That's all I do. And then I don't plan anything beyond that. So I just ask I have the first question, I have the last question, and wherever the conversation takes us in between.
Nice. I had a conversation with a previous guest about this, the freedom of just preparing a few questions, but not necessarily the entire set of questions. And we agreed that would be great for us maybe in the future, but right now we need sort of these questions just to make sure that we stay on kind of a good path, and that, as we keep recording episode, we'll be confident enough to feel more confident to prepare maybe just the first and the last question, as you said. But I'm glad that you can do it, because I feel like the conversation seems just much more genuine, I would say, when there is less preparation. So yeah, I'm glad that you can do that, really.
Well, I think when it comes to podcasts, there's no right or wrong way to do a podcast. Do you know what I mean? Like, depending on what the intention is, depending on what you want to get out of it, structure might be the thing that you need. For me, and what I want to get out of it, it's not structured, but there's value in both.
Yeah. I'm curious about something that you said, because I have the feeling that most of your guests come from your networking.
Mm-hmm.
Would that be correct?
Yeah.
And so, how does it work? What's your approach? And do you send like an outreach on LinkedIn or email? You also mentioned event in real life. So what's kind of your process? How do you manage to get guests from your networking?
There's no process. It's all natural. If I'm at a networking event, it's through the conversations that I'm having, just by accident. Like I'll have a chat with someone, and next second we're talking about this and learning about what they do, and it may be relevant, and so that's an opportunity. The podcast is an opportunity to have a better discussion. When it comes to LinkedIn, it's the same thing. I don't actively go out and try to grow my network. It's not something that I do. I show up in certain people's conversations that they're having underneath their posts. And oftentimes someone will, like, through the process of having constructive dialogue in the comments, sometimes people insert themselves into those conversations, and that's the moment that we meet, connect, have a better discussion, and that's a moment where they might end up on the podcast. So it's all very natural, and that's my approach to networking, treating the online world as just that, not forcing it at all, just letting things come naturally. The fact that I'm creating content in the first place gives them plenty of reason to talk to me if they find what I do valuable. And quite often when I'm talking to people in the comments, they're having a conversation with me because they find whatever we're talking about in some way valuable, and that they feel compelled to contribute to the same conversations.
I had a conversation, a previous guest, John Watson. He's an expert in networking, and with his own word, that's pretty much what he said. You shouldn't go for networking with a I'd say a sales goal in mind, but just be genuine, have natural conversation. Just don't expect anything. As much as you keep having conversation and building relationships, maybe sometimes something will come, but don't expect necessarily something to come, because you would be networking for the wrong reasons. He had said something like that. That's my own words. Just to go back last time on your podcast, is there something that you wish you knew before starting the podcast?
No, there's not.
Oh.
And the reason I'll give you a reason is because if you're out there right now and you want to start a podcast, the biggest hurdle to overcome is just starting it. And there's nothing that I wish I knew before, because throughout the process of creating it, I've learned a lot. And anybody out there that is thinking of doing the same will learn a lot. You just got to get over the first hurdle and jump in and do it. And don't spend too much money. Just get Riverside and start having a chat. Yeah.
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 Awesome. So what are you excited about for the future of the podcast, for your future of your business?
There's a lot happening with the business. I'm certainly excited to build the digital sales mastery cohort. I'm certainly excited to build the community that's behind that. I'm excited to start for me, I'm a traditional salesperson that's now ended up in the world of e-commerce, and that's all new and exciting. So I've got 1,000,001 different product ideas now that I know how it all works. So I'm looking forward to building some of those things and getting creative. In terms of the podcast, I'm just looking forward to continuing to do it. I was tossing up the idea recently about having a stop for calling it for season 1. But then the opportunity to have more conversations just kept coming up. So I've chosen to continue through. And at some point, I don't even know, maybe it's just going to be some long, 100 episode podcast. But I think the key takeaway is that it's an opportunity to connect with people on a deeper level. You don't get that opportunity to go deep with someone that you barely know in too many other contexts. So that's what I enjoy doing, and that's what I enjoy to continue to do.
Awesome. And yeah, I can't agree more with you about the podcast. It doesn't feel like it when you want to just to have a conversation with someone that you find particularly interesting for any reason, and that you think it would be also interesting for the audience as well. The podcast just makes sense. And kind of last questions. If someone is curious to go deeper about your work, is there a resource, a link, your profile, a podcast episode that you would recommend that they start with?
First, go to my website, tomorrowcommunications.com. You will find everything from my digital sales mastery course to the other workshops and things that I do there, including my podcast. If there was a podcast that I would recommend. The one that I'm recommending at the moment, because you get excited about things and then time moves on, but I would really recommend listening to the happiness episode. The Skills and Science of Happiness, I think is what it's called. It's with a happiness researcher called Declan Edwards, who works with organizational happiness. And I think that in a time where people are busy and people are feeling the weight of certain global events, it's a nice episode to put things into perspective.
Awesome. So yeah, I'll put the link to the episode, to the website, and to your LinkedIn profile as well if someone wants to reach out. And thank you, Brad. It's been a pleasure talking with you today. I mean it.
Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on. Appreciate it.
Thank you for staying to the very end of this conversation with Brad. If you think another BDB podcast host could get value from this conversation, please feel free to share them the link of this episode. It would mean a lot to me. And as for me, I'll see you on the next one. Take care.